Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Rainbow Maniac. The Rainbow Maniac is a serial killer in Brazil who was specifically targeting gay men. Over a span of 18 months from 2007 to 2008, this person took the lives of 13 separate people, execution style. Unfortunately, despite the time it's been, whoever perpetrated these horrific crimes is still unknown and uncaught. The location in Brazil where the crimes took place is known for being a more progressive area, but unfortunately at the time of the crimes, there were a few ultra-conservative groups who were extremely vocal about their intolerance towards people in the LGBTQIA+ community, so police believe that someone from one of these groups may be responsible, but of course this has not been fully substantiated. There have been suspects, and one person was even tried in relation to the crimes, but the jury found the person not guilty, so whoever the perpetrator is, they either got away with it or haven't been caught yet. In our number 9 spot today we have Pedro Lopez. Pedro Lopez had a very difficult life growing up, and unfortunately this led him to living a life committing crimes I can't even detail on this channel throughout South America during the 1970s. By the time the 1980s rolled around, he made a mistake during one of his awful crimes, and this led to his arrest. Once in police custody, he spilled all of the tea on basically his entire life and confessed to an insane amount of crimes. Police were a little skeptical of just how many crimes he said he committed, but Pedro was able to lead them to a mass grave where they recovered a total of 53 people's remains. Pedro of course went to jail, but get this, he was somehow released in 1994, which is absolutely insane. He was sent to some sort of mental institution for 3 years after, but he was also released from there. Okay, so aside from the crimes he committed, are you ready for the worst part? Well, in 2002 he was suspected of being the perpetrator of a new crime, but no one has been able to find him since 1998. Yep, Pedro just disappeared. In our number 8 spot today we have Keith Raniere. This piece of work was the founder and leader of a cult called NXIVM, which you may have heard of for either its abundance of horrific crimes or because of its most high-profile member, Allison Mack. Between 1998 and 2018, this cult developed a following under the guise of some sort of personal development group. That truly is one of the worst parts of this cult, that some of the people who ended up being a part of it were really just setting out to better their own lives and somehow found themselves being manipulated by this evil person. Unfortunately, a lot of the things that went on within this cult and most of the things that Keith ended up being charged with are things I cannot say, but Google is free should you choose to look more up on your own, but I warn you, it's quite dark. The good news, however, is that in 2019, Keith ended up being convicted for his federal crimes and was subsequently sentenced to 120 years in prison. It really is just nice when the justice system works. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Golden State Killer. If you have any interest in true crime at all, you have most definitely heard of the Golden State Killer, as he was one of the most famous serial killers of all time and managed to elude police for 30 years. From 1973 to 1986, the GSK was responsible for taking the lives of 13 people, harming 50, and 120 different burglaries across California. Throughout the investigation process, he used different tactics to both taunt and threaten police and victims, which is just on a whole other level of messed up. If you don't know how this story ends, buckle up because it is wild. So you know how those family DNA test things have really taken off in the last few years? Like those 23andMe things where you send in your DNA and then they send you back your genealogy? Well, basically these services helped identify who the real GSK was. In 2018, when Detective Paul Holes, shout out to MFM if you know you know, and FBI lawyer Steve Kramer uploaded the GSK DNA profile, which they were able to obtain from the crime scenes, to the website GED Match. They were able to find 10 to 20 people who had the same great-great-great-grandparents as the match. From there, a genealogist made a large family tree, and from there they were able to single out 2 main suspects. After covertly collecting DNA samples from one of the suspects and comparing them to the crime scene DNA, they were finally able to arrest Joseph James D'Angelo, who is the Golden State Killer. After decades of waiting, the victims of his crimes were finally able to see justice served, as he was sentenced to 12 life sentences plus 8 years. He was spared the death penalty guilty because he admitted to numerous crimes he had perpetrated, some of which he wasn't even being charged for. He is now 75 years old and will most definitely spend the rest of his life in prison. In our number 6 spot today we have Tex Watson. Tex Watson was one of the central members of the Manson family, which was led by Charles Manson, and was a willing participant for the horrible Tate and LaBianca crimes that took place on August 9th and 10th, 1969. If you don't know about them, you can look them up, but just a warning that the events that took place on those nights were horrible, gruesome, and insanely unnecessary. In October of 1969, Tex knew his arrest was coming, so he fled to his home state of Texas, but was later arrested and extradited back to California. Once he was in California, he refused to talk or eat and ended up losing 55 pounds, which got him sent to get tested to see if he was fit to stand trial. He was. In 1971, he was convicted on 7 counts of first-degree unalive and 1 count of conspiracy to commit unalive. He originally received a death sentence, but it ended up being commuted to life in prison. But get this, you guys. He was able to release a book while in prison, and he got married, and through conjugal visits was able to have 4 children. Thankfully, in 1996 they banned those kinds of visits for people serving life in prison, and in 2003 he got divorced because his wife had met someone else. Like, him taking the lives of 7 people wasn't enough, she just needed to find the right one. I cannot make this stuff up. He also apparently is now a devout Christian, which seems like it's a little late for that now, but I guess I'm just editorializing at this point. In our number 5 spot today we have the vending machine killer. Okay, this is something I didn't know before, but apparently Japan has a ton of vending machines. Like, so many, there's approximately 1 vending machine for every 23 people. That's a lot of vending machines. You might be sitting there wondering why I'm talking about vending machines on a list of evil people, but I promise it's relevant. So, in 1985 in Hiroshima, there were 12 people who passed away and 35 who were seriously injured from being poisoned with a chemical herbicide. When this string of poisonings were investigated, authorities realized that they had one thing in common, and that was the fact that they had all had the same drink shortly before falling ill. So, around the time of this whole thing, there was a company that had launched a marketing campaign where they gave you a free drink with every purchase made from a vending machine. When people didn't want their free drink, they would leave it on top of the vending machine for the next person who came along, which is super nice and thoughtful and kind, and of course that means that some horrible person out there had to ruin it for everyone. So, as it turns out, someone was taking these drinks, lacing them with poison, and then leaving them on the top of vending machines for some random stranger to come around, drink it, and then be sick or pass away. It is almost impossible for authorities to be able to track down whoever was doing this because you have to narrow down where the person picked up the drink, and in 1985 there weren't as many CCTV cameras as there are now. So unfortunately, whoever was responsible for this mass poisoning of strangers is still out there somewhere. In our number 4 spot today we have Elizabeth Wettlaufer. We are bringing it closer to home with an evil person who's from Ontario, Canada, which, if you don't know, is where I am right now. Elizabeth is a former registered nurse and serial killer who was responsible for taking the lives of 8 people and attempting to take the lives of another 6 senior citizens who were under her care. With a total of 14 victims that either passed away or were harmed by her actions, she is now one of the worst serial killers Canada has ever seen. And not to mention how she was doing these things to vulnerable people who she was supposed to have devoted her life to taking care of. Her first victim who passed away was James Silcox, who was 84 in 2007 and was a World War II veteran. She committed her crimes by injecting insulin into her patients. In September of 2016, Liz ended up entering herself into a drug rehabilitation program at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, which is located here in Toronto. It was here that she ended up confessing to her horrific crimes. Of course, the staff at the hospital notified the proper authorities, and she was subsequently arrested, and she gave police a 2-hour confession. She admitted to knowing what she did was wrong, but she said she just had urges she couldn't control. She stated that God or the devil or whatever wanted me to do it. She also apparently had confessed to the crimes to multiple people before, but no one believed her, which is absolutely absolutely insane to me. Why would anyone ever make that up or joke about that? Either way, she ended up being sentenced to life in prison, and she will eventually be eligible for parole. In our number 3 spot today, we have Daniel Perez. Daniel Perez might be better known by his alias Lou Castro, but he truthfully is best not being known at all because he sucks. Daniel led a cult that was located on a 20-acre property in a rural area just north of Wichita. He convinced his followers that he had magical powers, and he told them all that he was a centuries-old angel who needed to commit some horrific crimes in order to stay alive. These crimes would have certainly been more than enough to throw him on this list, but he of course couldn't just stop at committing one type of crime. He had to make sure he really stole the show on being the worst. Basically, he had the clever idea to use his followers' life insurance policies to live a lavish lifestyle. Like as if no one would think that's weird or suspicious. While some of these life insurance policies were collected through regular means, of course that kind of greed only leads to evil things, which of course means that he ended up taking one of his followers' lives so he could collect the cash. It is thought that he also contributed to the deaths of some of the other people's life insurance policies he cashed in on, but unfortunately there was never any evidence that would be able to substantiate that claim. Despite this, however, on April 21st, 2010, authorities were able to arrest Daniel, and he was charged with 28 felonies. In February of 2015, he was convicted on all counts and received a sentence of 80 years in jail. In our number 2 spot today, we have David Berkowitz. David Berkowitz, or the son of Sam, is an American serial killer who terrorized New York from July of 1976 to July of 1977. He took the lives of 6 people and wounded 7 others, all while eluding the biggest manhunt in New York City history. He was one of those arrogant ones who leaves the little notes for police promising to do it again. Well, his arrogant self was caught for his crimes, and he was arrested on August 10, 1977, and was indicted for his crimes. He confessed to all of them and claimed that he was just obeying the orders of a demon that had manifested itself in the form of a dog that belonged to his neighbor. Yeah, David. Okay. He was found mentally competent to stand trial, and he pleaded guilty to his crimes, which left him sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences. He later admitted to making up the dog story, which duh, but he did say that instead he was a member of a violent satanic cult and his crimes were committed as a part of that. These claims were investigated, but no one has been able to confirm or deny them. In our number 1 spot today, we have Charles Cullen. This guy used to be a nurse who took the lives of his patients throughout his career, and he may be one of the worst serial killers ever recorded. He confessed to taking the lives of 40 people, but through subsequent interviews, it became apparent that the number was way higher than 40. He just couldn't remember the names of them all, but he of course could remember the details of his crimes against them. That is truly a new level of messed up. His crimes started in 1998 and spanned over a decade into 2003. In October of 2003, when a patient at a hospital passed away from low blood sugar, the authorities were called. This person was Charles' final victim, and authorities began looking into him and investigating his past employment history. On December 12, 2003, authorities were arresting him and charging him with only 1 count of his crimes, but he ended up admitting to 40. He ended up pleading guilty to his crimes and arranged a plea deal where authorities would not seek the death penalty if he cooperated. During one of his court proceedings, he continuously asked the judge to step down and apparently repeatedly chanted, "Your Honor, you need to step down," for 25 minutes, even after he was restrained and gagged for his outbursts. It is thought that his victims might be up in the 400 range, which is truly unbelievable. Charles was sentenced to 18 consecutive life sentences and will be eligible for parole in 2403, but something's telling me that he might not get it.
Number 10, Tomás de Torquemada. Ever heard of the Spanish Inquisition? Well, this guy was one of its star killers. Not only do we wish it never happened in the first place, it did, so we might as well talk about it and learn from it. But we can't discuss the Inquisition without mentioning Tomás, who was responsible for thousands of deaths. He gave people 2 choices: either join the Catholic Church or die, which led to thousands of Jewish and Islamic people being exiled from Spain. He played the role of inquisitor and was in charge of investigating and punishing heretics. He oversaw the burning of thousands of innocent people, as Tomás often used cruel methods of extracting confessions from people he believed to be heretics. He seemed to almost enjoy his job, hanging, burning, suffocating, and tormenting people with the rack and waterboarding. No one knows exactly how many people died during the Inquisition, but historians estimate anywhere between 30,000 to 300,000. Pretty wide gap. There. Number 9. Caligula. Man, his name is too fun to say. Too bad he wasn't a fun guy. It's better I tell you now that essentially this list is a depiction of what happens when the wrong people get their hands on power. From 37 AD to 41 AD, Caligula ruled as if he was some kind of mad god that needed to be satisfied. Not only did his addiction to gambling cause a nightmare for the economy, he seemed to delight in suffering. In the first 3 months of his rule, he made his people sacrifice 160,000 animals in his name. When he first took over as ruler, people actually liked him though. He made helpful political reforms and recalled exiles, but most people blame his future tyranny on a brain fever that befell him later on. He blew money on lavish projects, some still helpful like aqueducts, to building a 2-mile long floating bridge across the Bay of Bali so he could ride his horse across it day after day. He even ordered his men to attack the sea by collecting shells with their helmets. His lascivious love affairs included copulating with the wives of his allies and even allegedly his own sisters. Caligula's reign was equal parts terrifying and embarrassing, which is probably why his officers stabbed him to death. Number 8. Leopold II of Belgium. During the height of colonialism, Leopold of Belgium wanted to make his mark by conquering the African Congo. As soon as I say colonialism, you know where things are going, so get ready. He made it his property, and instead of, being a good human being, he decided to establish a dictatorship instead. He made the rest of Europe think that he was acting as a good guy, so they'd give him money, then proceeded to hire mercenaries. These mercenaries were set with the task of draining as much money from the state by enforcing free labor camps. Anyone who disobeyed or failed to meet demands were severely punished and even had their limbs removed. Leopold was responsible for the deaths of 20% of the population and thankfully was stopped before he could do more damage. Roger Casement, after doing a little digging, released a report which detailed the horrors he had committed under the guise of philanthropy. He was forced to surrender the Congo, though it was considered a part of Belgium until the 1950s. Whew, buckle up folks, it only gets worse from here. It's number 7 and we're already at Genghis Khan. Get ready. Genghis Khan, ruler of the Mongolian Empire, killed so many people. He changed the carbon footprint of the earth. In one single battle, he killed over 1.2 million people. Though this sounds like an exaggeration, I don't find it hard to believe, since he just left the corpses to rot. The battlefields became oily and whole mounds of mountains of bodies formed. Genghis Khan was supposedly responsible for over 40 million deaths. If you need a number to compare that to, that's the same amount of people who died in World War I altogether. He also enjoyed in excess the spoils of war, brutalizing women and assaulting them. In addition to that, he held mass beauty contests and all those who didn't win would be given to his soldiers like objects. Because of that, around 16 million people are said to be descendants of him today. That's how many people Many people blame his brutal and ruthless upbringing, as Khan very much had to raise himself under the mentality to kill or be killed. He even killed his own brother at age 10 just for not sharing food. He was also horrendous when it came to tormenting his betrayers. Some ways include pouring molten silver down their throats and sawing people in half while they were still alive. Oh, and he killed 75% of the population of Iran and tried to commit an entire genocide. Yeah, the list goes on, but so does this list, and there is more to come, so let's go. Number 6. Talat Pasha. Pasha was the Grand Vizier to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire in the early 20th century and was the main architect of the Armenian genocide. When Armenian families were evicted from their homes in 1915, his signature was on the orders. On April 24th, they executed several hundred intellectuals in order to begin Turkifying the country. Many were sent through the Mesopotamian desert on death marches without food or water after being stripped naked so the sun would just boil them alive. Anyone who stopped walking was shot. He also created a special organization made of killers and ex-convicts who were ordered to carry out the liquidation of the Christian elements. They drowned people in rivers, threw civilians off cliffs, even crucified and burned people alive. Yep, this happened in the 1900s, by the way. So there are about 600,000 to 1.5 million reasons we wish this man never existed, because that is how many people Pasha was responsible for killing. Ooh, Man. Number 5, Idi Amin. General Idi Amin staged a coup on January 25th, 1971 and forced Uganda's first Prime Minister Milton Obote into exile. From there, he created a reign of terror that abused Uganda's freedom after more than 70 years of British rule. Amin organized mass executions of Akoli and Lango Christian tribes who were loyal to Obote. He terrorized his own country with internal security forces whose main purpose was to eliminate those who opposed him. His brutality also resulted in the collapse of the economy. This man just seemed like he just didn't have a single good bone in his body. He was also rumored to have eaten human flesh, and his vicious and inhumane rule resulted in the death of 300,000 civilians. Eventually Amin was forced to flee and sought refuge in Saudi Arabia, though he was never punished for his crimes and died in 2003 due to organ failure. So he got away with it, essentially. Number 4, Pol Pot. You'd think a leader's job would be to protect and serve their country with love and respect, but I guess Pol Pot didn't see it that way. Originally named Salah Sar, Pot was the leader of the Khmer Rouge totalitarian regime during 1975 to 79 in Cambodia, though technically longer. It was a radical communist government who caused the death of more than 2 million people through forced labor, starvation, disease, torment, persecution, and execution. He wanted to purify society and wanted to extinguish capitalism, Western culture, city life, religion, and all foreign influences in order to form a pure communist regime. All media outlets, along with embassies and external medical help, were refused, and essentially he barricaded Cambodia into their own little world. Education was halted, healthcare eliminated. It was crazy. The people were forced into slave labor on the killing fields, only allowed 180 grams of rice a day. Deadly purges were conducted to eliminate remnants of the old society, including monks, police, doctors, lawyers, teachers, ex-soldiers along with their families, and former government officials. His cruelty and madness knew no bounds. It took years for him to finally be put under house arrest by his peers and was never truly punished for his crimes against humanity. He died of a heart attack in 1998 following his arrest. So, yeah. And we're reaching our top 3. I bet you thought number 3 was gonna be number 1. Nope, there were worse people than him, believe it or not. Number 3, we have Adolf. I can't say his last name because apparently YouTube won't let me, which is ridiculous. He's not Voldemort, but you know who I'm talking about, that really evil German guy. Yeah, I don't really need to go into detail here unless you don't know about one of the most infamous genocides to take place in all of history. Along with the amount of people Adolf's army killed in World War II, his warped and disgusting worldview resulted in the destruction of more than 6 million lives, mainly those of Jewish descent, but LGBTQ, political prisoners, and basically anyone he and his followers deemed a lesser human. He was the personification of hatred and led the world into one of the most deadly wars to date. We should also give a shout out to all of his henchmen who served underneath him, all working together to enact one of the cruelest moments in history. If he hadn't been born, who knows if it would have happened anyways due to political and social tensions of the time, but maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't have happened at all, and all those lives would still be around today. Number 2, guys, like I knew he was bad, but dug deep today, and I would never thought I would say this, but number 2, Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin made his own henchmen disappear in photos, and boy do we wish it was him instead. Stalin was the premier of the Soviet Union and was responsible for the deaths of more than 20 million of his own people, double that if you count World War II. He ruled for 30 years and ruled with an iron fist, eliminating anyone who opposed him, and as you can guess, there were many. In 1927 to 1929, he had 1 million people exiled or imprisoned, 9 to 11 million were forced off their lands, and 3 million peasants were arrested or exiled in the mass collectivization program. 6 to 7 million were killed by artificial famine in the 1930s. During 1936 to 1938, he executed approximately 750,000 during the Great Terror, a brutal political campaign to remove dissenters and any others he considered a threat. He was so paranoid. This guy had no regard for human life whatsoever. While the world was focused on Adolf, he was doing all of this, and he was fighting on the Allies' side, though we started supporting Hitler, and then he came onto our side anyways. It is estimated that Stalin orchestrated the deaths of 60 million people, which means about 40,000 people died every week during his reign. Need I say more? And if you think that's bad, number 1 spot, Mao Zedong. Ready? I don't think anyone can be. Mao Zedong during 1966 to 1976 turned China into a house of fear by eradicating 65 million people. In his attempt for a socialist China, he killed anyone that got in his way, kind of like Stalin, through execution and mass starvation. His biggest threat was the intellect, and revered Emperor Shi Huang, who buried 460 scholars and sought to surpass him by burying alive 46,000 scholars. Yeah, my stomach turned when I read that. That's awful. He coined his operation the Great Leap Forward. To combat rising resistance, he created the Red Army, composed of girls and boys from the ages of 14 to 21 to roam cities and target enemies of the state, especially their teachers. He would make the teachers wear dunce hats, cover their faces with ink, and make them crawl on all fours and bark like dogs. He also expanded a system of 1,000 forced labor camps. Most amazing fam, I could go on, but I honestly don't have room. It just seems like there's no end to all the awful things that he did. For all these reasons and more, Mao is of course in our #1 spot. Starting up pretty strong at number 10, we have William Devon Howell. One of the few people on this list that have actually been caught, which means more terrifying things are on the way, just a heads up. In 2003, Nilsa Arizmendia was seen getting into a 1985 Ford Econoline which belonged to Howell at the time. She had no idea that this very car is the vehicle Howell referred to as the mobile. Sorry. After her blood was found in the car, Howell was arrested, but the blood was anything but cold when 3 more bodies were discovered along the same stretch of road in 2007. They prayed that was it until 4 more bodies were found in 2015 in the same area. The land in question is the area behind a strip mall in Connecticut. Investigators finally linked the bodies to Howell after he confessed to another inmate about his garden. Even more disturbing is that he used to sleep next to the corpses as they decomposed before he disposed of them. The most terrifying factor about this man is the fact that the body count just never appears to stop. Could there still be more he hasn't confessed to? Probably, and we might get to that later on in this list. Number 9, Hazel Leotta Head. Imagine being able to evade the police in this day and age when there are practically cameras everywhere, and perhaps even spyware in our phones, right Google? Hazel Leotta Head is just one of the names this woman uses and has been wanted since 1998. She took the life of a man named Charles Barker after conning the widower by pretending she was a woman named Deanna Ray. Barker had lost his wife of 11 years to a drunk driver, and Deanna swept in to save his sunken heart. His family became suspicious of her, but by the time they knew something was wrong, Deanna had put a bullet to his head. His gun was wiped clean, the safe was entirely empty, and his car was found at an airport with DNA on the seat that identified Deanna as Hazel. However, this was only one of the aliases she used, as she had been married over 10 times. Although Hazel would be around 72 today, we have no idea what she looks like. She could be anyone, perhaps someone you know, someone who might be beside you on the bus or in line at the coffee shop. Could you be her next target? Number 8, Israel Keyes. I can only imagine the kind of horrors that a soldier sees, and it's because of them that I hopefully will never have to, but terrifyingly, it seems Israel Keyes brought them home. In 2011, Keyes revealed his plan he had been waiting to act on for years. He had planted what he liked to call kits. Only he knew where they were. When he was finally discharged from service, he turned off his cell phone, flew to Chicago, and then drove a rental to Vermont. He used cash for everything so as not to be traced by card. Back in 2009, Keyes had buried one of these supply kits in Vermont and decided to use one on a random couple he'd met. His most famous victim was Samantha Koenig in Alaska in 2012. As if robbing her of her life wasn't enough, he taunted her family with texts, photographs, debit withdrawals to make them think that she was still alive. Keyes himself admitted to taking the lives of 8 people, though only 3 have been identified to this day. The most terrifying part about this man was his lack of pattern, however meticulously he planned. So that kind of seems hypocritical, but it's like he did it at random to whoever he wanted to, but he also planned it out, so creepy. Though he may be behind bars for now, one day we might find another of his victims, and who knows what horror discoveries that will lead to. Number 7, Vicki Jackson. Yet another on this list, thankfully behind bars. Jackson is still a grim reminder that not all people who seem good are. From December 2001 to February of that same year, Vicki took the lives of 20 people and attempted to steal 5 more. She worked as a nurse in the small town north of Texas for a while when all of a sudden her hospital went under a plague of respiratory deaths. But all the patients who died were elderly, so it wasn't uncommon and nobody thought anything of it. But Vicki made one foolish mistake. No one would have been suspicious until one nurse noticed several vials of mivacurium chloride were missing. This drug is used to temporarily disable a patient's ability to breathe. Why that's even a thing I don't know, but probably for surgical reasons. Then another one of her colleagues recalled how Jackie would often say, "I'll take care of them," referring to unruly patients. Investigators narrowed in on Jackson and she admitted to all the crimes even though it took until July 2002 for her arrest. So it just makes me kind of creeped out about, people we leave. Like, this one creeps me out because this could be anyone, you know what I mean? And I also hate the fact that she abused a job that is so necessary and so important and just, terrifying. Don't like that. Number 6, the West Essa bone collector. February 2nd, 2009 would change Christina Ross forever. What started as a simple dog walk ended in a disturbing discovery. She and her dog encountered human bones on a mesa near Albuquerque, New Mexico, which police were shocked to confirm was the case. The bones belonged to women who were reported missing from 2001 to 2005, from the ages 15 to 32. All 11 of the women were in some way linked to street work, save one, and it took examiners close to a year to identify them all. The perpetrator has since been named the West Mesa bone collector, but that's about as far as they've gotten. Dead end after dead end, detectives are stumped and terrified that a killer like this could evade them. The case remains open to this day, and the FBI has had a reward out for $100 grand for information regarding the case for over a decade. I hope this case warms up and this evil person, whoever they are, is caught, but it's still disturbing that someone can get away with something like that in this day and age. Number 5, Jeff Davis 8. Jennings, Louisiana has a population around 10,000 people, probably more now. So for 8 women to go missing only to reappear dead in swamps and ponds around the city within 5 years, it would definitely be a shock. But the case remains open to this day, which makes whomever is behind it someone you never want to cross. But it gets creepier than that because it could be more than one. The woman lived in the same areas, and similarly to other cases, they had histories of street work and criminal activity. They all died of the same cause, asphyxiation, which clearly links them together, but for over a decade, no solid suspect has ever been nailed down. The lack of suspects have led to allegations of misconduct by law enforcement, and there was even a controversial book that was released accusing members of the police force of being clients of the women. Ethan Brown was the reporter who wrote the book and continues to say that the case was mishandled after staff were fired for speaking up. There are a lot of seedy details involving this investigation that clearly make it seem like a cover-up, so is it one person who should be feared, or has one rotten apple spoiled the whole bunch? Either way, I hope one day someone puts whoever is behind this behind bars for good. Number 4, Route 8. I wish wooded areas could be a place of peace and fantasy, but too many criminals have left their bloody mark. Route 8 south of Torrington, Connecticut is one such area, a forest just off the road that has served as a nefarious dumping ground for evil people. Between 1988 to 2004, 4 young women were found and they were all from Waterbury, which connected them. Now, this isn't one of the cases the police had no suspects for, which is a good thing, but instead they had 3 and they are no closer to narrowing them down. All of them are thankfully in jail for other charges. Richard W. Rogers is one, in prison for taking the lives of 2 men, though he primarily attacked gay men, so perhaps not him. The second is Steve Hayes, in jail for taking the life of Jennifer Hawk Petite and her 2 daughters during a home invasion. However, he is considered a pathological liar. And then the third is none other than William Devon Howell. Yup, the guy we mentioned before. Remember how I mentioned there are probably more victims? Well, Exhibit C. However, each suspect has a hole in the case, so it could very well be that the criminal isn't behind bars yet. So who should we really be afraid of? And coming up to our top 3, if you're liking this video so far, give us a like, follow, comment, do your thing. You know what we love, and we love you for it. So let's continue without further ado. Number 3, the smiley face killers. Whoever is behind this case is probably one of the most evil people in the world. These crimes are so disturbing that they have even bred conspiracies. Over a 20-year span, over 45 college-aged men have all drowned while intoxicated. Even more strange is that they all occurred in 11 different states. Despite the distances, investigators believe that the deaths are connected by not one, but several people. The one big thing that connects them and feeds this theory are the disturbing smiley faces that are painted near the crime scenes. At least 12 of the men have this in common. Investigators believe that they are abducted, killed, and then disposed of in water, giving the impression that they drowned. Does anyone else think it is a bit strange to connect all the deaths? Potentially, but beyond the creepy smiles, the party drug has been found in their systems, as well as the men are all in the same category: white, athletic, successful, and popular. Whether or not you believe the crimes are connected, these men aren't ending up dead by themselves, and none of their cases are closed, so who is behind it? And number 2, the vanishing women. Chillicothe is a small town in Ohio where evil seems to be at work. The killer is primarily targeting women of the night and those who recreationally use heavy drugs. Between 2014 and 2015, several of these women disappeared and only 4 were found dead, while 2 more are still yet to be discovered. Only 1 man has been brought to justice over one of the crimes, but he could not be linked to the others. But that's the scariest part. This may not be a case of one person being evil, but of several. According to the June 2015 Cleveland Plain Dealer Report, updated in 2019, the town leaders are convinced that the drugs and related issues may play a role in the crime. Police are concerned that this could be a case of trafficking that is preying on women in desperate situations. Many of the women knew each other, work in the same places, which lends more fuel to this idea. Last but not least, man unknown. This last perpetrator still remains on the loose. We wish we could say that these kinds of crimes died in the 70s, like all the rest of them, but sadly that's not the case. In Phoenix, Arizona, there's a terror plaguing the streets. This horrific criminal has taken the lives of 7 people and injured so many with a semi-automatic shotgun. They shoot at random and have no specific target in mind. It could be old, young, male, female, whatever. So needless to say, people in Phoenix are double locking their doors. The criminal seems to primarily target the Latino Maryville neighborhood, but so far police have no leads on who could be the killer. In June, the shooter fired over 30 times where Malia Ellis, her mom Stephanie, and family friend Angela Linner were sitting. Sadly, they all passed away. The only description they have of him, and this is it: light-skinned Latino or white man in his 20s. Authorities are offering a $30,000 reward for any information that leads to the arrest, but so far nothing.